All right, before we start today, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, I know the lighting's not great, the handwriting on the board isn't good, there's maybe a few books missing from the bookshelf. Okay, seriously. My hair's very pink, I'm aware. It's super pink. I don't think I was intending for it to be this pink. I kinda love it, but also in a couple of washes, it'll rinse down to the exact pastel shade I was going for, and then about 2 washes after that, it'll just be completely freaking gone and I'll be devastated again. But this is where we're at, you guys. Anyway, I hope that, oh no, do you know what we should do? We should clock now, take a guess, like comment a guess as to how many comments you think I am going to get calling me something derogatory, something centered around liberalism, feminism, maybe might be you know the types of comments that are going to come. Let's see how many we think I'm going to get across social media platforms. So put your guesses in the comments.
What's happening? Rose is the one wearing pink.
And?
It's gorgeous.
But anyway, moving on, because today we are here to talk about Interstellar and gravity. Now, I've done videos about Interstellar before. I have a big long one that I did that I've been meaning to redo for a really long time. And I love this movie. I know it's a bit controversial. Some people, I've seen people talking about it recently where they're, like, this is not a good movie, or if you think this is a good sci-fi movie, you're crazy. And I'm like, guys, it is one of the best science movies that has been made. And the only argument needed to, or the only statement needed to argue that case is simply just read Kip Thorne's book. Like, that's all, just read Kip Thorne's book. I think the problem is the concepts used within Interstellar are so speculative and they're so on the fringes of theoretical physics that a lot of people just think that they're complete and utter nonsense, which is fair. But we're going to talk a bit about the gravity one today, because when we talk about Interstellar, we tend to focus on like the wormhole, the black hole, the time travel. But the thing that binds it all together, that actually creates the entire situation in the first place, is the gravity. So we need to understand what the actual science story of Interstellar is, and to do that, we need to know what the real problem is in the movie, and that is gravity.
But the lie. Monstrous lie.
At the center of Interstellar is a lie. Now, a very elegant, well-intentioned lie to be sure, but it's still a lie. Professor Brand promises that humanity has a future among the stars, that he's working on an equation that will let us lift massive colony ships off the Earth, that there's a way to escape. And there is, kinda, but the catch here, the thing that Brand doesn't tell anyone, is that the equation doesn't work, because gravity is not playing along with what he wants it to do. So this isn't a story about building better rockets. It's not about engineering or hardware. It's all about physics. And the reason that humanity can't leave the Earth is simply because nobody understands gravity well enough to control it. So what was Brand actually trying to solve, and why aren't rockets enough?
Now you need to tell me what your plan is to save the world.
We're not meant to save the world. We're meant to leave it.
So the situation in the movie is that Earth is dying. The atmosphere is breaking down, food systems are collapsing, there's no resources left to build 1,000 separate rockets and evacuate billions of people from the planet. So there are only 2 options, 2 plans. Plan B, load up frozen embryos, send them through the wormhole, and hope that someone can build a new society on the other side. Save the species, but not the existing people. And then there's plan A. This is the one that Brand tells everyone he's working on. It's the one to solve gravity. Not solve in the sense as like just do the math problem. Fundamentally understand how gravity works at its core, or at the small scale. This is so that he can manipulate it, reduce its strength, bend it, make it possible to lift massive colony ships off the surface of the Earth and into orbit. Because rockets aren't going to cut it. A standard rocket today burns through around 11,000 pounds of fuel per second during liftoff. That's just to push a payload the size of a small bus into orbit. A colony ship full of people, resources, infrastructure, you're talking about building a space station in Earth's gravity well and then trying to push it out. You'd need millions of launches or more fuel than the planet actually has on it in existence anywhere. Even if you built the ships in orbit, it still doesn't solve the problem because you still need the thrusters, you still need to do course corrections, you still need to get the people to the ship. And the thing is, the fuel problem scales with the mass because more fuel adds more weight, which needs more fuel to push the added weight. It just keeps going and going and going. And that's just basic Newtonian physics, F equals ma. Force equals mass times acceleration. So to move a massive object, you need a massive force. And that's why Brand isn't building rockets. He's trying to find a way to reduce the force of gravity itself, to reduce that gravitational acceleration, to lift the mass without having to match its weight with fuel. And to do that, he needs to understand gravity, not just as a force, but as a function of space and time. And he needs to understand how it behaves in extreme environments, not just on Earth, but, near black holes, at singularities, where our laws of physics start to break down. And that's where the trouble really starts. So let's talk about why gravity is so hard to work with in the context of the movie and what we're talking about. For most of our daily life, it's pretty fine. It's pretty normal. Anyway, we talk about gravity like it's pretty basic. I mean, we do, right? You drop something, it falls. Planets orbit stars. Rockets need escape velocity to get off the surface of the planet. We're used to this, right? But gravity is doing something way stronger than we give it credit for. So let's start simple, okay? We have Newton. In Newton's universe, gravity is a force. It's a straight line pull between two masses. Now, the bigger the mass, the stronger the pull. We have an equation that represents it, which is clean, it's intuitive, it works beautifully for almost everything. Falling apples, satellites, tides, rocket launches. But Newton's model starts to break down into very specific situations. When things are moving close to the speed of light, and when gravity is really intense, like near a black hole or a neutron star. So for that, we turn to Einstein. In general relativity, gravity isn't a force at all. It is actually the result of space-time being curved by mass and energy. So mass tells space-time how to bend, and then space-time tells objects how to move. You can kind of picture it like a trampoline, that like really standard demonstration that we see. You get a bit of kind of like from material, stretchy material, you put a massive object in the middle, you see how it dips and you see smaller objects fall towards it. This is happening not because they're being pulled, but because they're following the curves that are being made in that fabric. So the more massive the object, the deeper the well, and then to climb out of that well, you have to put in energy. Now, if you don't have enough energy to be able to climb up, you fall back in. I mean, the same thing happens if you go hiking up a hill, right? If you don't have enough energy to make it to the top, you're gonna fall back down. So this basic principle is what makes Earth's gravity so hard to overcome when it comes to spaceflight. Not because the force is strong, gravity is actually the weakest of all of the fundamental forces, but it's because Earth's mass is bending space-time around it, and escaping that bend takes a lot of work. But we have another problem now, because even Einstein's theory starts to break down in the most extreme environments. When you approach a black hole, space-time is bent so violently that all the equations stop working. The warping becomes infinite. and the force lines of gravity collapse into what we call a singularity. This is where we can't rely on Newton, we can't rely on Einstein. We have now entered a regime where neither classical physics nor relativity can fully describe what's happening. Physics breaks down at this point, or known physics breaks down. And this is where Professor Brand is stuck. To solve gravity, to bend it, manipulate it, maybe even reduce its strength, he needs to understand how gravity works at the smallest scales, in the most extreme conditions. He needs a quantum theory of gravity. And we don't have one. So the reason that Professor Brand couldn't finish his equation isn't because he was like bad at math or anything. It's because physics itself is broken at the point he was trying to solve. The equation he's working on, the one that is supposedly then going to allow them to control gravity, is what physicists call an action. Now, it's a tool that we use to describe how systems behave over time using known physical laws. If you get the action right, you can then derive all the equations you need for like motion, energy, field behavior, all of it. But in this case, Brand is trying to create an action that connects two completely incompatible frameworks. On the one side, you have general relativity, Einstein's laws of warped spacetime, gravity wells, the whole thing. And then on the other side, we have quantum mechanics. Heisenberg, Schrödinger, uncertainty, wave functions, all of that. These two do not play nice together. They just don't go together as far as we know yet. In normal conditions, like that's fine. It doesn't really matter to us in our everyday lives because quantum mechanics handles all the small stuff and relativity handles all the big stuff and the fast stuff. You just pick the right tool for the problem that you're trying to work with. But in places like the center of a black hole, where matter is incredibly dense, gravity is really intense, and space-time itself is collapsing, you need both at once. When you try to apply both, well, they give different answers, which is not ideal.
That's immovable.
Surely nothing is immovable.
Amy, this is like explaining gravity to a chicken.
And quantum gravity is one of the biggest unsolved problems in modern physics. And that's why Brand couldn't just like finish his equation in the movie. He was trying to describe how gravity behaves under quantum conditions, but the data doesn't exist. Not here. Anyway, to get it, you'd need to observe a singularity directly. Not just its effects, the actual laws operating inside it. And the only place to do that is inside a black hole, which is of course impossible, except in the movie, it isn't. So in the movie, they don't just like say, let's fly into a black hole and hope for the best. They follow the logic of the problem and then they solve it within the rules of the universe that they have created, which is why it is a great science movie. Cooper and Tars dive into Gargantua, the supermassive black hole, and what they find isn't death. They find a doorway. Inside the event horizon, time slows so dramatically that it almost stops. They're falling not just through space, but through time. And as they approach the singularity, the place where space-time is infinitely curved, they don't get torn apart. Now, Kip Thorne explains this, reasoning for this, as because Gargantua is described as a gentle singularity, which apparently is a somewhat real thing. Now, the idea is that in a gentle singularity, the stretching and the squeezing happens at an infinite rate, but the overall force on the object is finite. So it's theoretically possible. It's not likely, guys. Let's be very real about this, okay? But it is theoretically possible to survive the crossing without being spaghettified, because the stretching that is happening is oscillating so quickly that there's not enough time for you to actually get stretched out. This is what Kip Thorne says, like, look, we can like major speculation here, okay? But it is a clever way to describe a good reasoning for him to be able to cross the event horizon. Or we accept it. We're accepting it. We're accepting it. Cooper passes over the event horizon and he ends up in what looks like a giant cube of infinite bookshelves, the Tesseract. Now, the Tesseract is a term used to describe a four-dimensional representation of a cube. When I say four dimensions, I mean four spatial dimensions. So we live in 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, so we live in 4-dimensional space-time. If you have 4 dimensions of space and 1 of time, you have 5-dimensional space-time. So a tesseract is 4 spatial dimensions. And the way that we kind of visualize it when we see images of it is a 3-dimensional representation of it. So the same way a square drawn on a piece of paper is a 2D representation of a cube, the tesseract is a 4D representation of the cube. So the tesseract that Cooper is in is a 3-dimensional projection of this 4-dimensional space-time. That's how he's able to survive in it, because he is a 3-dimensional object. He's not technically in 4-dimensional space. He's in a protective region of it that he's able to survive in, which we know is, in essence, a tesseract. So he can see Murph's bedroom in not just one moment, but across her entire timeline. That's because from the perspective of the bulk, the higher dimensional space that our universe is thought to be embedded in, time becomes a spatial dimension. Now it can be moved through, navigated, revisited within this tesseract. Cooper, however, is still a 3-dimensional being, so he can't freely move through the tesseract. He can't go to the past. He can't, enter Murph's bedroom at different times. But he can send signals through, and he can do this using gravity. And this is where it all comes in together with concepts in string theory. So according to string theory and Interstellar's version of it, which is essentially Kip Thorne's version of it, gravity is the only force that can travel through dimensions. We can talk about it leaking through dimensions, that it's not confined to our brain space the way that the other forces of nature are. And this would explain why gravity is so much weaker than the other fundamental forces, because some of it is leaking into higher dimensional or other dimensions of space. So when we talk about these concepts of these other dimensions, or this bulk space that they're talking about in the movie, things like light, communication through sight, speech, radio can't travel through, but gravity can, and so can gravitational effects, which means Cooper can send messages back to Murph using gravity, the very thing that Professor Brand is trying to control. So he tilts books, he moves a watch hand and encodes a signal. Now, TARS, meanwhile, has collected all of the quantum data from inside the singularity, the missing piece that Brand never had access to. And Cooper relays that data to Murph through the second hand of a watch, which, I will never be okay with. Fine, it's through time and it's time of a watch and there's symbolism and all that kind of stuff, but it is, let's be real, it comes across as a little bit ridiculous, doesn't it? The entire data that you need about quantum gravity from a singularity of inside a black hole is encoded in the second hand of a binary system, or binary code second hand on I don't know. Some things we accept that are required for the plot device and the storytelling rather than the accuracy of the science. We move on, guys, we move on, okay? So what we know is that Murph takes that data, she finishes Brand's equation, and humanity leaves Earth. Like I said, not because they built better rockets, but because they finally understood gravity well enough to make it work in their favor. So in the end, the problem wasn't about getting to another planet or traveling faster than the speed of light. It was simply about getting off the one that we're on. Rockets weren't enough. Not when gravity is holding everything down. And we didn't really understand how gravity worked I say we didn't. That's in the context of the movie, because we still don't know anything about quantum gravity. Brand was never going to solve his equation, though, from a lab on Earth, because the data he actually needed didn't exist there. It was inside the black hole. The only way to finish his equation was for someone to fall into the one place that no one could ever actually come back from. Look, it's not the most practical solution, sure, but it is a pretty good one. And did you know that Kip Thorne actually wrote out all of Professor Brand's chalkboards in the movie? I also did it once for a video on the big chalkboards at in one of the lecture halls in the university, and yeah, it took hours. I gave you one version here. So, quantum gravity is one of the biggest mysteries still in modern physics. There are a lot of different ideas. String theory is one of them. It's not the only one, but this movie is very specifically looking at concepts in string theory and looking at concepts in bulk brain cosmology. So those ideas being that our universe is a brain existing in a higher dimensional space called the bulk, and that's what wormholes would punch through this higher dimensional space, and that's how they would connect in different points in our space. The wormhole in the movie is as accurately described as it can be by the equations of general relativity, as well as the black hole. We know that there was a lot of incredible things that came out of this movie due to the way that they were able to visualize the black hole, using all of the equations and the information that Kip Thorne gave them. So the visuals of it are incredible. The concepts around time travel to do with like gravitational time dilation and everything gives us a really interesting story about time. There is a debate about who the higher dimensional beings are. Now, I made a video about this before and people got really testy with me about it. The comments got really snippy, you know? They were like, oh, you didn't understand the movie. They say it in the movie. It's future humans. They say it in the movie. I can't believe you just watched the movie. I wasn't questioning what the movie was saying. I know the movie says future humans. My problem is that so think about it this way, right? Humanity discovers how to manipulate gravity. Oh, sorry, that's one other thing I wanted to say. The manipulation of gravity, right? The concept in the movie is centered around if you could manipulate the value of the gravitational constant, then you could manipulate the value of the force. Scientifically thinking of how you would actually manipulate the value of the gravitational constant, or the idea that an understanding of quantum gravity would allow you to do this, that is not a known thing. That is not a statement that says like, oh, if we discover quantum gravity, then we will be able to do this. That's not what science is saying. That's just like a plot device in the movie, right? This idea that if we could understand quantum gravity, does that mean that we would then be able to manipulate it? And that's the thread of where they go with the story of it, okay? So that's why we don't have an understanding of how they did the solution to get the ships off, but we just accept that that is where the story went. Now, these ideas that they kind of center around in that way means that humanity has to discover quantum gravity. They then have to leave Earth, survive. In the future, they have to figure out how to manipulate higher dimensional space, how to generate a wormhole, how to build a tesseract in order for Cooper to then go through the wormhole and go into the black hole and go into the tesseract, which creates a bootstrap paradox in time travel. So that is my argument. Right? And I do believe that in the book, that is also Kip Thorne's argument. I don't think he talks about the bootstrap paradox necessarily, but he always, from what I can recall, he envisioned in his mind that it was higher dimensional beings or alien beings, not future humanity. But Christopher Nolan chose future humanity for the story, and that's what they go with. So for a story device, it's a nice kind of circular thing, interesting, circular time, circular everything, great. Scientifically, considering how beautiful the science is and the story and the use of the science being as accurate as it can be, like Kip Thorne did say to Christopher Nolan at one point that the only rule he had, or like the only thing he asked for him was you cannot break the laws of physics. as we know them, and they don't in the movie. But the bootstrap paradox is just, it's like a little cheat. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just a little cheat. It's like, oh, okay, well then, you know, humanity saved themselves in the future, but then how does it start? That's the problem with the bootstrap paradox. There's no beginning to the bootstrap paradox. It's a closed loop. There's no beginning to it. So it kind of cheats it out of it. Anyway, that's my just little post ramble, which I didn't really mean to talk about. That's not what I was intending to talk about today. Today we were just talking about gravity. So that is the anti-gravity solution in terms of Interstellar. But what is your favorite anti-gravity solution in sci-fi? And also, are there any explainers that you would like me to do? You can let me know in the comments, because I would genuinely love to hear what you guys think. And also, if you want more sci-fi science breakdowns, you can, of course, subscribe to this channel. You can have a scroll through the playlist. There's a bunch of stuff in there. Also, if you're interested, on Patreon right now, I'm going through all the Alien movies before I will then do a big science breakdown, which I already did with Rick and Morty Season 1, so you can check that out if you're interested. And look, you don't have to like sign up to the video thing if you don't want to. If you just want to like chat about Alien movies, you can just pop on in there and we can just chat back and forth about that if people want to. So yeah, thank you for watching and hanging out with me. Stay nerdy. Bye.